Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, March 6th, 2025. Time to get going again. And we are short one Greg Dworkin today as infrastructure catastrophe has struck. Not in his house, outside of his house, somewhere in the neighborhood of his house. Not only has infrastructure catastrophe struck, but an automobile has struck a telephone pole. And in Connecticut's one of those places that when you smash into a telephone pole, you take everything out. Electricity, telephones, internets, everything, because it's all strung over the ground. Whereas the rest of the country, built later on, buried much of that stuff. I don't know if it's really worked any better in terms of keeping the infrastructure up and running, but I don't know. You're able to plant flowers on top of it, so I guess that's nice. Anyway, apparently that's the case. Got a message last night that without internet, well, the show just doesn't work, whether we try it on Skype or on Zoom or whatever, all internet dependent, of course. And that's sort of a vulnerability, not only for the show, but for the country and the world. And luckily we have a maniac internet genius, apparently, running everything and doing it all backwards. Anyway, lots to catch up on, of course. I don't know whether today is maybe a good day to like hit headlines and then move on, but it always seems worth reading through the body of the articles just to find out if there's any nuance in there or any clues we've uncovered that don't make the headlines or aren't implied by the headlines, or sometimes just questions that get posed by where the hell is this writer coming from, or what an interesting insight into things. And we could start with one of those. There are plenty of examples out here. I don't know, where the headlines are all over the place today. But I do feel like I read something yesterday. And what exactly was it? I should have kept a note to myself. What is the thing that I'm thinking of that I said, oh yeah, somebody's making an excellent point there. I fail to remember when the excellent points are being made. It's the bad points. They usually stick out to me. And now I'm just trying to remember exactly what it was that I was thinking of in all of this. And gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to come up with it. It's all right. We'll take a tour around the headlines instead, I guess, and see if we're reminded along the way of what it was we were thinking of. And maybe, what's on Justice's mind today? Okay. Well, Ukraine. Yeah, lots of Ukraine news. VA, yes, also. I guess we'll start domestically in firing the entire government news. There's still more fallout coming from the speech that was said to be not the State of the Union the other day. More or less, again, same content as a campaign rally. Nothing new there. I guess I should say one little bit of fallout is I guess I don't know how much credence to give it, but it wouldn't take much. But I guess circulating somewhere in, crouch and hide Democratic world among membership of the House is a movement that maybe they'll be nice to us. Maybe they'll leave us alone and stop beating us up and taking our lunch money if a couple of us join with Republicans in voting in favor of a resolution of censure against Al Green for standing up and yelling during the non-State of the Union address. Of course, there are also others who rightly point out Republicans stand and yell at Democratic presidents during State of the Union addresses all the time now. It's standard practice, and nobody gets thrown out of the hall of the House, much less do we bring a resolution of censure against them. Sometimes resolutions of censure are brought when they endorse Nazi policy or deny the existence of the Holocaust or whatever. Occasionally things like that, or announce that Jewish space lasers are lighting fires around the country, sort of things like that from time to time. But interrupting the president during a speech hasn't been one of them. And let's just say you better not. There's a really serious disconnect going on here, and a lot of interesting commentary on it online, and I guess social media, not real life necessarily, but an interesting trend that I see being pointed out everywhere is this idea that I guess all the true rank and file Democrats just want, to talk about the price of eggs. We're always concerned about the price of eggs, but that's all that they want to talk about, or the price of anything. And we just want to talk kitchen table issues, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess it's true that we do want to talk about the price of eggs. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, and what a weird phenomenon it is, and how there are people pushing back saying, no, broaden your horizons here. Don't just focus on this one thing. Yes, that's true, but I don't know anybody who's like, I'm an egg voter and only an egg voter. That's just not a thing. But it's also being misinterpreted, likewise, to no one's surprise, by, I would say, Democratic consultant class. Well, when they say they're upset about the price of eggs, that means they're really talking about kitchen table issues. We need to talk to them about the prices of everything. Child care, for instance. Yes, true. Good issue, a true thing. A real problem, could be solved by, an actual activist government, but we don't have that, and they're not going to solve it. And we're kind of like, at this point, it's eye roll. Like, one of the things we ought to do is like, okay, Constitution, should we pay attention to it, try to preserve it? Yes, no. If so, then great. Then I guess we can talk about child care costs. But in the meantime, Trump take egg, and that counts to a lot more people. There are even people who think eggs are kitchen table issues and that child care costs are not. I don't know. It's just very weird, and how your normie Democratic voting citizen is more up in arms about the seriousness of the issue than the consultant class, or in many cases members of Congress. I don't think you're going to get very far with people who are looking for Democratic leadership by helping Republicans censure one guy who at least made an effort to offer some kind of Democratic leadership. I know there are people who are uncomfortable with that kind of protest, but then, shut up. Stop protesting that you're upset with protest. I thought you were upset about protest. Keep your mouth shut. All right. Well, anyway, I don't know whether we can deal with them systematically or not. But anyway, lots going on. Have seen that mentioned. And as a matter of fact, I guess on that topic, a widely shared comment, as all of Jamel Bouie's comments are widely shared, especially on social media. He's reacting largely the way I've seen a lot of people reacting to this offering, also on Blue Sky, from this originates with Eric Michael Garcia, who I'm going to have to click on and look. Oh, the clicking is working much better, by the way, today. Washington bureau chief of The Independent, the UK paper, Independent? I guess so. MSNBC columnist, and an author of A Thing, which I guess is a book. I don't know, just as author, We're Not Broken. Okay, we're not stolen. We're put away. We're Not Broken is the name of, I guess, the book. I don't know. I'm not diving any further into it than the social media profile. But Eric Michael Garcia captured something that has captured a lot of attention across the internet from an Atlantic article, which there's no surprise for you. Something controversial from out of the Atlantic that makes people say things like, should I be subscribing to this magazine? It seems like it's sort of a good liberal publication and maybe something that I want to be a part of. And Adam Serwer writes there, and he's real good. And a number of other people write there, and they're real good. But every once in a while, one of these things. And this isn't, I don't even know if this is an article that I disagree with writ large. This is a very interesting excerpt that has been taken and circulated from Tim Alberta's piece. And I feel like we've approvingly read some Tim Alberta work in the past. The advice Elissa Slotkin didn't take. The Michigan senator wants to set a new tone for the Democratic resistance, says Tim Alberta. And it's interesting just to hear the headline. Oh, and it's a gift article. We'll be able to read it, too. It doesn't even look like it's terribly overlong. Now I'm intrigued by it because what advice didn't Elissa Slotkin take? Elissa Slotkin, of course, was selected to deliver, of course, the Democratic response, the official Democratic response to the non-State of the Union. So it was a response. It just wasn't a State of the Union. And I think that selection probably got some it certainly got a bunch of meh. The selection, I don't even know how she did with the speech, because I didn't watch any of it, and I don't care, and I'm not upset about it either. I don't know what kind of reception it got. The idea of it, the announcement of it, got a bit of a meh. Some eye rolls, probably. I mean, I see what they were trying to do in selecting her. And, it was never going to be AOC, so just stop it. And it doesn't even matter if it's not AOC, because you could tell her all day long that you're not the one responding to the non-State of the Union speech. She's going to be responding to the State of the Union speech regardless. She's going to turn on a live stream and respond. It would be like saying, well, we're not letting Kagro in the morning do the national response. But there's going to be discussion of it the day after. I didn't even watch it. I'm going to be discussing it. So anyway, so now I'm kind of interested in the entirety of the article. But just to set the stage for you, before I do that thing that I said I wasn't going to do, Jamel Bowie is commenting here. Now, Eric Michael Garcia takes this article and he grabs a screenshot from it and writes, Alyssa Slotkin told Tim Alberta why her response to Trump's joint address, again, did not touch on a laundry list of priorities from various advocacy groups. And it's interesting, as I'm watching so much reaction to it. Now I think maybe I do have to read the article. Between that and the headline, like, that's not what I thought this article was going to be about. We'll find out. Anyway, the section he grabs reads, none of this would seem a revolutionary approach to rhetoric. Still, it was fraught with risk all the same. Democrats, quote, have been on their heels since the election, unquote, Slotkin told me, and the party faithful have been agitating since January 20th for anyone, to stand up to Trump. The announcement of Slotkin had already been met with grumbling from progressives online. Anything short of oratorical firebolts would confirm the complacent, feckless approach of the D.C. governing class. Slotkin viewed the stakes somewhat differently. This speech could, at least symbolically, commence a new chapter of Democratic Party opposition to a president whose success is inextricable from the tone-deaf ineptitude of Democratic Party opposition. If her team's resistance to Trump's first term was marked by hysteria and hashtags, all the land acknowledgments and pronoun policing and intersectionality initiatives, Slotkin saw last night the opportunity to set a different tone. Well, not surprisingly, Jamel's response to this is, look, I'm sorry, I'm gonna forego the censoring horn on this one, even though I love playing the sound effect. I'm sorry, I'm tired of this shit. That's what he said. I'm just saying. There was no pronoun policing. No, there was some, but it wasn't policing. I mean, there were people who said these are my preferred pronouns, and I dislike that you're going to intentionally use the ones I asked you not to. And, I don't go in for all this PC nonsense. But once again, you're reminded that politically correct means being respectful and polite and nice to the people that you're having to deal with face to face for whatever reason. They ask you, this is my name, call me by that name. What's wrong with that? Well, I can see that, or I know that we're born a different gender. Yes. And I'd like to be called this name. And sometimes it's silly and sometimes it feels weird and sometimes you mess up and you do the wrong name. I understand all of that. But intentional resistance to it, I don't know. Anyway, as Jamel says, he's tired of all this. There was no pronoun policing. I've encountered exactly 3 or 4. You can't say exactly 3. Exactly, and then say, 3 or 4. But I'm sure no more than 4. Land acknowledgments in like 10 years. And does everybody even know what those are? I had to pause and think about that one for a little bit. I recognize what it is. And it was, I don't know what the context, like where do you use them? But I guess if you're, I don't know, where I saw them, maybe also, I don't think I ever encountered one in person. I've seen them in other people's videos of conferences that they've done or whatever. And if you're doing like a Zoom conference and where you would ordinarily say, my name is so-and-so, I'm calling from, let's say, Virginia, like now, or, wherever. And then instead, as a land acknowledgement thing, you say, I'm calling from, Algonquian I don't even know what tribes are here. I looked it up at one. Powhatan, maybe. Powhatan, maybe. I don't even know how to pronounce it, but I'm not certain. I'm not that attuned to it. But you would acknowledge that you're on Native American land that used to belong to such and such a tribe, whatever the local tribe was. And, you had to do a little bit of research, and that's always good. You can learn a little something along the way. And it was meant, I don't know, it was meant to be an acknowledgement of the fact that the land was stolen from Native Americans, which I think we all know, at least intellectually understand, might have been a little bit of a waste of time. And some of these tribes simply don't exist anymore. And I don't know who's feeling gratified by having it be acknowledged. But I guess other tribes, it's nice of you to acknowledge that the land was stolen from this tribe that doesn't exist anymore. That's okay too. But it was not a widespread practice. And mostly because even well-intentioned people were like, well, I this is not what I came here for. And I forgot, I didn't do the research. I don't know how to pronounce the name of the tribe. I don't know. It doesn't make any difference in the terms of what I have to say about this thing. It was not an overwhelmingly popular thing. And that's what Jamel's getting at. There's no pronoun policing, 3 or 4 land acknowledgments in like 10 years. And the most you'll hear about intersectionality is in liberal nonprofits, which is usually just, I don't know, we could find some natural allies in this work because this issue affects everybody. So, I mean, I never used the term intersectionality, but we used to talk about silo breaking all the time, just in terms of, well, like when we were doing filibuster reform and saying, this is not a niche issue. If your niche issue is the environment, you're going to need filibuster reform and only in order to, do the legislation you're thinking of. If you're worried about judges and appointing decent judges to the bench, you're going to need filibuster reform. If you're worried about trans rights, you're going to need filibuster reform, right? All these things. So, it's a real thing, intersectionality. I'm sorry if the term bothered you, but okay. But anyway, as he points out here, this is just free-floating resentment masquerading as analysis. And I don't even know how, but now that I see the headline in the thing, I don't know which advice Alyssa Slotkin isn't taking. But I guess if it's reflected in the part that's excerpted here and that people are mad about, then I guess she was rejecting the advice to include, inclusion. To include the various legitimate grievances of the groups. I guess this is another installment in the evolution of the groups, whatever they may be. So let's take a look at this. But yeah, it's becoming something of a serious issue here that normies and wine moms, and I know everybody was rolling their eyes about normies and wine moms and how supposedly ineffective they were delivering, the presidency and briefly the Congress back into Democratic hands. Oh, no. But they have a better idea, I'm sure. Let's see what Tim Alberta has written up here. Right around the time that Donald Trump was arriving at the U.S. Capitol to address a joint session of Congress, the longest such speech, it would turn out, in the history of the presidency, Alyssa Slotkin, the newly elected Michigan senator tasked with delivering the Democratic Party's rebuttal, was telling me all the things she wouldn't be talking about. You got to say this, you got to say that, Slotkin said, mimicking the outside voices that began bombarding her office moments after her selection was announced last week. I'm not going to make my speech a Christmas tree of every single issue of the Democratic Party, the senator added. You wouldn't be able to. Trust me, I try 2 hours a day. It doesn't work. Shaking her head. That's because that's what helped us get in this position in the first place. Oh, boy. I am always wary of people who know exactly how we got in this position in the first place. They were out there running, particularly if they were out there running for Congress. And one, you would think that they would understand that things might be broader than that, but maybe not. I have known Slotkin since 2018, Tim says, when she first ran for Congress as an ex-CIA officer attempting to flip a safe Republican seat in southeast Michigan. Having covered her rise in the years since, including embedding with her operation during the 2020 campaign, I knew that she possessed fundamental, long-festering concerns about the Democratic Party's brand. Slotkin feared That, to the extent that Democrats stood for anything in the eyes of the electorate, it was a blur of abstract, ideologically charged activism that was hopelessly detached from kitchen table concerns. Geez, I don't know about that. Last November, even as she won her own race for Michigan's open Senate seat, Slotkin's worst-case scenario came to pass. Trump reclaimed the White House, this time with wholly subservient Republican majorities in Congress, and Democrats were heading deep into a cold, dark political wilderness. A fight over the future of the party was imminent when Slotkin, barely 6 weeks on the job, was chosen to deliver the Democratic response to Trump's primetime address. It seemed likely that the first shots would soon be fired. This is how I came to be chatting with Slotkin yesterday in the hours before the biggest moment of her political career, maybe. A week earlier, when she was summoned to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's office, Slotkin wondered whether she was in trouble. She's one of several freshmen in the Congress or Democratic caucus who came over from the House, where intra-party politics are a comparative blood sport, and she thought maybe she'd already ruffled some feathers. She probably flatters herself in that sense, but if she had, Schumer approved. He wanted Slotkin to speak for the party in prime time. She recalls feeling stunned, then honored, and finally somewhat mortified. It's typically thought of, she told me, a cursed speech. I see what you mean. Slotkin asked for the day to think it over before ultimately accepting Schumer's offer. I know it's a big spotlight, but it is something of a trap. I think she's right about that. Escaping quickly thereafter to her family's farm in Holly, Michigan, and golly, isn't that all American? I know. The senator holed up with a few trusted staffers to begin preparations. 2 decisions needed to be made: substance and setting. Setting is always a loser. Don't worry about it. Slotkin had no shortage of metaphor-rich locations from which she could stage the event. Her farm, representing everyman roots. Nearby Detroit, with its diversity. Oh, we don't know that. And manufacturing iconography. The Canadian border, to underscore the chaos being unleashed by Trump's new tariffs. At least there would be action there. But the senator never truly entertained any of those possibilities. To her, the question of substance and setting were one and the same. So she did consider. Anyway, she just didn't consider those settings. Slotkin wanted to showcase a message that was built to do one thing: win tough elections. And that meant going to a place where she'd done just that. Driving to the main drag of, Wyandotte? W-Y-A-N-D-O-T-T-E. Wyandotte, maybe Michigan. Population. It's always important to tell you what the population is so that you know that it's a genuine town with real live Americans and everything. 24,057. So driving to the main drag yesterday afternoon, I, Tim Alberta, couldn't help but notice the bait shops and dive bars. I think I'm souring on Tim Alberta as I'm reading this. Bait shops and dive bars and white dudes with tattoos on their neck. This place would appear to the typical Democratic consultant parachuting into its downtown, like I guess you, like a lost cause. One of several manufacturing villages clustered along the Detroit River just south of the city, Wyandotte is the kind of place, working class, culturally conservative, racially homogeneous, that has turned new shades of red in the Trump era, and yet, this past November, both Trump and Slotkin won here. Each of the candidates carried 7 of the city's 10 precincts, a rare example of ticket splitting in one of the nation's premier battleground states. Slotkin's formula has never been a secret. Her campaign for Senate last year, essentially a scaled-up version of her 3 heavily contested and tactically celebrated campaigns for the House, was built around one organizing theme: the middle class. Everything she talks about, be it healthcare costs or the January 6th insurrection, thank God that got some mention, comes back to the economic security of everyday Americans. Oh boy. Slotkin argues that the surest way to heal the country, because all of the country is just like Wyandotte, because, isn't it? To defuse identitarian struggles, pacify the culture wars, uncoil our hyper-tense politics, is by restoring the confidence of working families. When people feel assured of their financial welfare and their children's future, she insists, they become far less receptive to the type of strongman demagoguery that thrives on scapegoats and feasts on anxiety. All true. Although, as it turns out, and I know this is intersectionality and everybody hates that, some working class families have transgender members. Some working class families have issues that sound like culture war problems and not kitchen table problems, and they'd like some help and support in dealing with that. It's true. I don't think that there's any reason to believe that only one socioeconomic class has to deal with gender issues. I think it's everybody. This approach sets Slotkin apart from many of her fellow Democrats, though the difference is better measured by degree than kind, and that's probably wise to remember. She is quite familiar as a woman, as a Jew, as the daughter of a woman who came out late in life as a lesbian. Oh no, that can't be middle class. With the plight of certain constituencies within her party's coalition. It's simply a matter of emphasis. Slotkin sees electoral success as the path to addressing America's injustices and not the other way around. And that certainly gets plenty of acceptance here. We all understand that. And that's, thank God, that's offered up at some point, because otherwise this is turning into a real disaster. But it's true, you do have to win the election first. But it's also true to point out that working class families have lots of problems. There's intersectionality out there. And if you don't like the term, use another one. But acknowledge that it exists. Okay. Anyway, this is what brought her to a sleepy event space in Wyandotte, as it turns out, even if that's not the way you actually pronounce it. The owners, fearing political retaliation, requested that I not reveal the name of the business. It's also what brought Slotkin to reject all of the suggestions she received about her speech, that she should use it to take up the cause of USAID workers, of undocumented immigrants, of the transgender community, the environment, or the education department, and so on. The problem isn't with any of these particular causes, she said. The problem is that everyone seemed focused more on people that she might name in her remarks and less on the people who would be at home listening to them. Meh. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And here in Wyandotte, Michigan, I got a note right in the middle of the break, and well-timed, from Rosalind McGregor, our chief Michigan correspondent, who says everything's just fine. I was wondering whether, during the break, could it be Wyandotte or something like that? I mean, I maybe if it was Pacific Northwest, I would have gone with Wyandotte. But Wyandotte seems about right for Michigan. I'm learning sometimes how different sections of the country typically anglicize things. We have our own sort of East Coast, Algonquian Federation Indian pronunciation of place names that are taken from the Indian language and anglicized, and you get to recognize them. And some of that going on in the Pacific Northwest as well. And I guess even way up north in Michigan, but I don't know. Anyway, we got the thumbs up, seal of approval on the pronunciation here, so that's helpful. Let's read through the rest of this, because I don't know, it's making me annoyed. But I shouldn't be. We've been over this territory over and over 100 times, but I guess it's important to know that it's still out there happening. I just thought that was kind of an interesting summation of the things as we went into the break here, with Slotkin saying, well, I don't know. I don't think I should use it to take up the individual cause of all these various lists of people with grievances. It isn't that there's a problem with any of those particular causes, but it's that everyone seemed more focused on the people she might name in her remarks and less on the people who would be at home listening to them. And that's a very, heartlandy, kitchen table kind of a thing to say. And I understand the drive behind it. But again, and maybe the logic of this doesn't necessarily matter that much, as long as you get around to this, as long as you get around to something that wins, that's true. And I mean, I guess she was picked for her ability to win in her district and then statewide, and that's nice and everything. But again, all politics is local, and yet we keep saying, well, this local person will surely have the key to winning in every other state as well. And I'm not certain that that's the case. And also, as I said, well, you should name USAID. You should name undocumented immigrants. You should name the transgender community. You should talk about the environment, the education department, and so on. No. It's not that there's anything wrong with them. It's that nobody's thinking about the people at home who are listening to this. Except the people who are at home listening to this have got one of those things on their list as their top priority. They do. Whether it's egg prices or anything else, or, I don't know if they really care. Fentanyl coming across the border, if that's what bothers them, I don't know. But, we have a very weird phenomenon going on, as they pointed out, both Trump and Slotkin winning in this town. And I'm just not going to, fire up the party base here. That's in the next section here. If they wanted someone to speak to the hardcore base of the party, they picked the wrong gal. Maybe, but who gave you 7 of those 10 precincts in Wyandotte? Wyandotte. I've confused myself by trying to overthink this thing. But you won it, right? Well, was it because they were so Trumpy? No. Was it because they only talk about childcare costs? No, it wasn't that either. I mean, they didn't know that there was going to be problems with USAID, and I guess he did promise to close the education department, but Republicans have been promising that forever. I just don't see how she arrives at these conclusions the way she does, but I'm watching to see if I can understand it. I'm less worried about who's named in the remarks and who will be listening at home. Those people at home have that kind of feeling. They prioritize things too. There's not this magical, worthy proletariat that considers all groups to have the same merit. Nothing like that is happening either. I don't know what she's talking about. Well, she goes on to say, there are a lot of people, including in this town, who will never scream on the internet, who will never go to a rally, who will never get involved in partisan politics, but they just want their government to run, Slotkin said. And may I remind you, there's, a million more such people than there ever will be in Wyandotte or anywhere else. In New York City, plenty of people who will never, in fact, in San Francisco, scream on the internet, go to a rally, get involved in partisan politics. They just want their government to run. They're everywhere. It's true. And they just want their government to run. Yes, but why? So that USAID doesn't get disrupted. So undocumented immigrants can be dealt with in a reasonable manner. So the education department isn't destroyed. So that transgender people, including people in their family or people that they know or people they didn't know were transgender but turn out to be transgender, whatever, aren't persecuted. That's why they want their government to run. Yes, they also want their social security checks, and they want the price of eggs to be low and their cars and houses to be affordable. Sure. And they recognize probably that the government really doesn't do all that much with respect to making that happen within normal bounds. But you can wreck it. That's true. They understand that. Anyway, she goes on to say, I'm speaking to them, not just to the hardcore base of the party, which, by the way, just wants government to run. And if they wanted someone to speak to the hardcore base of the party, they picked the wrong gal. And yet somehow, in the middle of Trump land, you found that 7 of 10 precincts in Wyandotte voted for you. But I don't care about the base of the party. They seem to care about you, so it wasn't very nice of you. There would be no performative shout-outs, no box-checking patronage, She's so independent. It's great. As the envoy for the party that has long operated as a syndicate of identity-based advocacy groups, Slotkin wanted to try something different. Really? Charged with countering 100 minutes of Trump's trademark, what is this? Fanfaronade. What? By the way, it wasn't Tim Alberta who was writing about how we can't be using $10 words every time talking. I don't know what does the base now. What do they think in Wyandotte about is fanfare the base of this thing? Fanfaronade? What? I can figure out what it means, but honest to God, weren't we just being lectured not to talk this way? The senator aimed to use the fewest words possible, like fanfaronade, whatever that is. I don't even know how you pronounce that. I've got zero idea. Maybe I'm right. The senator aimed to use the fewest words possible to speak to the largest number of Americans she could. Oh, she's an efficiency expert. Slotkin would talk for just 10 minutes about bringing prices down, holding American values up, and remaining civically engaged. Totally not what the base wanted to hear, I'm sure. And the base was fine with that. Don't worry about it. I don't know what you think you were talking about. And by the way, if the response ever went on, I don't know how long responses take. But in this situation, especially after a 100-minute speech, if you went longer than, honestly, 5 minutes was probably too much. 10 minutes, I'm sure, the soul of moderation. But there's nothing you can do to respond to the State of the Union. And I almost feel like they should just stop trying, or at the very least, stop trying to be heard. It should be just about being seen. After a State of the Union type address in that setting, in the hall of the House of Representatives, and with applause and shouting, and there's all sorts of interaction involved. It's as speeches go, as governmental speeches go, it's a very active one. Different camera angles are happening, different shots, different faces. If you sit in a library somewhere and deliver an address direct to the camera, it's the most boring, the most boring coma-inducing thing you could ever possibly. And it doesn't matter if the library or wherever the hell you are, small business. I don't even know what the setting she chose was. We only know that it was in Wyandotte. It doesn't matter unless there's people there and lots of them cheering and making a kinetic scene of it. It's just not going to work. That's my opinion on it. I've never seen anybody try it my way and succeed, so I got no data for you. But I can tell you the only thing more boring than a State of the Union address is the response, no matter who's giving it or where they're doing it. None of this would seem, this is the part we read, none of this would seem a revolutionary approach to rhetoric, and it's not. Still, it was fraught with risk all the same. Democrats have been on their heels since the election, right? They were waiting for anyone to stand up to Trump. And by the way, someone literally did stand up to Trump, and I don't know how Slotkin feels about it. She may be dismissive of the idea like I am, but there are Democrats who I think that they're aligning with the Slotkin approach. We're just talking about the regular everyman. They don't want to see this nonsense. They respect the presidency even if they don't like this president. And they want to censure him. I'd be curious to know. I mean, Slotkin can avoid this issue because she doesn't have a hand in censuring someone in the House. But they're waiting for anyone to stand up to Trump. Not like that. I mean, come on. We discussed this at home, by the way, and now it really seems quite insightful to have said, as production staff here at the KITM World Headquarters noted, all right, it's okay. You know what? Go ahead. They're going to if they end up censuring him, he can be the Colin Kaepernick of the Democratic Party, and everyone will soon realize that he was right all along and the people who got on his case were wrong. Yeah, but couldn't we just skip the part about helping Republicans deliver their message of opposition is wrong? I'd like to see it start that way instead. Anyway, so blah, 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 blah. And then her list of, this is interesting, right? Her speech was not going to be a laundry list of boxes to check and shout outs to different constituencies. No. In fact, here is a laundry list of things that it's not going to be. She's checking every box for all the people who hate box checking. Land acknowledgements, hysteria and hashtags, pronoun policing, intersectionality initiatives. Check, 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 check. I'm not for box checking. Doesn't that strike you as a kind of strange? Naturally, everyone was not thrilled with what they heard. Slotkin's address suffered from the same half-heartedness that has seized the Democrats since last November, my colleague Tim Nichols wrote in The Atlantic. See? Capturing some of the criticism online, her response and the behavior of the Democrats in general show that they still fear being a full-throated opposition party because they believe that they will alienate voters who will somehow be offended at them taking a stand against Trump's schemes. I suspect that Slotkin might cringe, oh no, at being lumped in with Democrats in general. In truth, I've noticed a certain unease she feels with her partisan identity. She struggles to mask her contempt for far-left organizations. She has little patience for colleagues who, she once told me, run very online campaigns in safely blue districts that blind them to the reality of what it takes to earn a ticket split from Republicans. Or a ticket split from Republicans, that is a terminology. True, but sorry for your contempt, but all politics is local. And guess what? Your style of campaign won't work in their districts, and theirs won't work in yours. And that doesn't make you an effing genius of the universe, and neither does it make them the effing genius of the universe. You need to have both. That's intersectionality, and everybody hates it. Boo. Anyway, sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Michigan's a different place from other places. That's true. Seems like not an innovation in rhetoric, just like it was said earlier in this very same article. Watching yesterday evening as she rehearsed in front of staffers, I noticed that only once did she identify herself as a Democrat in the final line of the speech. As we spoke a few minutes later in a cramped corridor just beyond the set, I asked whether that was intentional. I think, at least in this part of the world, there's real skepticism about Democrats, that they're weak. She paused, perhaps noticing her usage of language of the third person plural. Slotkin continued that we're too careful, she trailed off, being too careful, I guess. Weird? I asked. Weird, Slotkin confirmed. She rolled her eyes. Whatever, I'm just trying to be the opposite of that. You know, my campaign motto was Team Normal. And I think that's what I'm still trying to do. And I think that represents a bigger part of the country than people actually know. What was weird was when they actually had the opportunity to label the other guys as weird and turn the tables on them. And they said, no, we can't do that, even though it's working right in front of my very eyes. People don't want us to call other people weird. People want us to cower in fear of other people thinking we're weird. I don't know how much I agree with her on that. Golly. The president's speech would not begin for nearly an hour, but I already could detect certain angst in Slotkin's voice. And you know what raises the confidence level of Team Normal out there? Hearing angst in the voice and saying, I'm not so sure that she is up to this task, but she's on my television, so I guess I'll go along with it. It had nothing to do with her own speech. She had run through it a half a dozen times that day, pausing and tinkering and restarting until she knew that it was fully cooked, and it probably was. Instead, like a family member preemptively contrite for what their relatives might say or do at the Thanksgiving table, Slotkin betrayed an apprehension about how her fellow Democrats might respond to Trump. As it turned out, she was right to worry. Between all the awkward and impotent demonstrations, Representative Al Green of Texas angrily waving his cane at the president. Some pink-clad lawmakers didn't love that a whole deal, but whatever. Protesting silently with popsicle stick signs, others staging a disordered walkout during the speech. Verdicts were rendered about the party's pitiable state before its messenger could even say her piece. Not that Slotkin paid that verdict much mind. After her speech, the senator and her team were headed down the street to a Teamster bar. That's how you know they're authentic, goddammit. And Slotkin told me the highest praise they hoped to hear from the owner and his patrons was, that sounded pretty normal. It's easy to achieve that. All you have to do is stand in front of some books and say, we feel like we should help people with childcare. That's normal. Didn't do anything, but it's normal. Perceptions of her party were never going to shift in one night. Slotkin came into yesterday accepting, if not explicitly addressing, the realities of the brutal two-front war in which she was now a high-profile combatant, opposing Trump's executive and legislative blitzkrieg while simultaneously battling with other Democrats who have their own visions for returning the party to power. Slotkin insists she isn't one of the 100 people preparing to seek the Democratic Party's nomination for president in 2028. She was chosen to speak last night for more compelling reasons. If she wins time after time in places where other members of her party simply cannot. Okay, I mean, it's a good thing. Line up, give us your vote. You don't have to identify as a Democrat if you don't think that'll help you win in your district, or not say it a whole lot, but you got to vote our way. Will you do that? All right, fine. If they want to model her success at the ballot box, Slotkin told me they should stop ignoring half the country. They're not running in that half of the country, nor are they ignoring half the country. I don't know. It doesn't win elections to just speak to the base of the party, Slotkin said. If it did, Kamala Harris would be president. Wow. They just narrowly missed being colleagues, the two of them. It's interesting to see once again the note that somehow Kamala Harris was the weird one. Kamala Harris was the one who was out of touch with reality. She was senator from California, vice president of the United States. I don't know. She seemed to me to have. She didn't win the election. That's true, but I can tell you how many. I can probably guess for you how many more votes she won than Alyssa Slotkin for president would have won. I know she didn't run. I know she says she's not running. I know she did win Michigan, but I mean, she's from Michigan. You would expect that she'd have a better time of it running in Michigan than Kamala Harris did. The dismissiveness of Kamala Harris's success. I mean, does Alyssa Slotkin win California? I don't know. Maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. I find the whole thing pretty weird, especially the people who have all the answers. Strikes me as weird. Now I remember who had, I think, made such an interesting point. Well, one of 2 or 3 points that I thought were worth catching up on, but I don't know if all of them are parked in Blue Sky here, or rather in Pocket. But at least the one good point that I'm thinking of, I think is hidden in some of these Blue Sky posts. This was an interesting one, just from Atrios, riffing a little bit on Blue Sky. I thought, since this may or may not be reflected in his blog or whatever, but it won't be printed up in the national newspapers, and therefore you won't read it unless I read it to you or you're following him on Blue Sky, which you probably are. You may be. Pointing out here, in ye olden blogging times, the modal prominent Dem-leading bloggers and their readers were basically, you'll never believe this, normie Dems. Yeah, horrified at Dem passivity, in fact. So, of course, prominent Dems, people who became the Alyssa Slotkins of the world, dismissed them as childish lefties. And he does point out, in making another good point, nothing wrong with being a lefty, but Marcos was not one. That's an interesting thing, too. And remember where Marcos had at one point attempted to begin his career was in the CIA, which, of course, produced Alyssa Slotkin. Marcos is certainly left-leaning, but he's not, when you say lefty, I mean, he's not like a hardcore communist socialist, not that kind of lefty. No, he, too, basically a normie kind of Dem, just caught by surprise in the run-up to the Iraq War as to why are Democrats saying, what people really want is for us to get on the George W. Bush bandwagon and back this mistake of a war, this intentional mistake of a war, right? I think Adrios is right in recognizing that, and it's a good counterpoint to the whole Slotkin narrative that Tim Alberta provides us with here. Yeah, I know everybody points at and says Daily Kos or some stupid Democratic blog, whatever it might be. They're a bunch of out-of-touch lefties who just want kooky socialist policies, and it really was never actually true. And there was plenty of actual demographic evidence for that. Ask people, who are you that are reading Daily Kos? How many, we could do it the other way around, how many of you in the general population, as we're surveying you, read, listen to these blogs, listening to these podcasts? And it turns out, they're mostly, wine moms and normies, and that is inconvenient for the narrative that allows you to ignore their advice, which is weird. And then you find yourself out of touch with the Democratic base. And then you say, well, that's just because the Democratic base is a bunch of morons. I want to talk to normal people. Well, that's who we're talking to. And I thought that was an excellent point. And there's more to it. But he also reminds me as I'm going on, since we might now, instead of touching on headlines, we can do this thing stream of consciousness, which is every day anyway. But I noticed just before coming on the air, I spotted who's talking here. All right. And this too is the reaction to a reaction to a reaction. But I happen to see Julian Sanchez, normative, commenting on the comment of one Aaron Huertas. Aaron is lists himself in the bio as democracy and unions liker, former House staff, and writing his own blog and work at aaronhuertas.com. But I don't know. I'm sure I'm picking up in the middle of the riff here, but he's got here a quote, the imaginary quote of people who are opposing the thing that he's proposing, and you'll be surprised to find out what the thing he's proposing is. The quote is, "But an impeachment vote won't work." It's the Republicans control both houses. It's true. It won't. But he's trying to make a different point. An impeachment vote won't work? Cool. What other parts of the Constitution should Democrats preemptively give up on because Republicans suck? I see what you mean. I see what you're getting at there. Right. Don't just, give up on the idea because, there are a million other parts of the Constitution that are being sacrificed to this guy. Why sacrifice this one? But yeah, you probably should expect that a movement to impeach Trump at this particular moment will go down to failure because of who controls the House and Senate. But it will never come to the Senate. But Julian noting also the funny thing about stuff that's politically unrealistic like this is that sometimes it becomes politically realistic if you keep pushing. But if you don't, it definitely doesn't. It has, he goes on to say, not yet, alas, gotten through to enough voters that Trump is engaged in a wide array of impeachable conduct. One way you can help them realize this is acting as though you yourself believe this is true. And I think he finds a lot of sympathy in even among the Democratic base for that. The crazy Democratic base. Woo, we're so crazy and leftist. Although it made me say, 2005, what have you got in store for me today? What? It's 2025. I mean, this is exactly what we were up against in calling for impeachment support or support of an impeachment movement against George W. Bush, who I know now looking back, it seems quaint. Oh, what was he doing that was so unconstitutional compared to what Trump is doing? Compared to what Trump is doing, nothing matches up. But I mean, it was sort of, I don't know, torture, indefinite detention, suspension of habeas corpus for some out groups, spying on peace groups, warrantless surveillance of political opposition. I mean, there were some things there. And, it won't work. We don't have the votes. And it's interesting. At the time, there were people who said exactly that. And some of those people are today saying this, like what Normative and or Julian and others, Aaron, are saying. It doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't be doing it. And now they're saying it does make sense. You should be. It's a process. We've woken some people up, and some of them were too young, of course, to have been expressing any sort of political opinion in 2005. Definitely true. Let's see. Here's a comment along the way here. Although it doesn't bear directly on this one. Okay, so we'll try and keep things under control here. What we were going to read, though, then was more about what Atrios was. So this is what Atrios reminded me of, is that when he says, in ye olden blogging times, and it really being normie sentiment. And it's true, right? Here I was back then saying we ought to be thinking about, talking about, moving towards, even if it doesn't work, impeaching George Bush, impeaching Dick Cheney for his stupid ideas about the unitary executive, which now not only come back to haunt us, but the leopard has eaten his whole family's face. But whatever, how could I possibly have been right about that? Normie Democrats who wanted that to happen are just a bunch of liberal idiots, et cetera, et cetera. But in truth, they were the normie audience that Alyssa Slotkin is pretty sure she's reaching by going to a Teamster bar after giving a speech. I didn't give a speech that won them over, but I went to their bar. Maybe that'll win them over. I don't know. And it probably did. Probably more so than her speech. And quite honestly, she probably went there and said, what'd you think of the speech? And they were like, it's normal, meaning I didn't watch it. I didn't watch the other guy. I didn't watch you. No. Didn't happen. Anyway, as Adrios is pointing out, there's a larger point to develop here, right? In ye olden blogging times, the modal, prominent, Dem-leaning, I know it's $10 words, Dem-leaning bloggers and their readers were basically normie Dems horrified at Dem passivity, so of course, prominent Dems dismissed them as childish lefties. As for blog readers, they were middle-aged mostly, and I know that's sort of a self-selecting crew, like when we started to look, at least in the early days. I haven't been there in a long time, but Netroots Nation, who showed up? Yeah, it was a pretty good demonstration that it turns out that mostly they weren't radical young socialists or Chapo trap house types either. They were middle-aged people. That's who showed up. Now, that's, again, it was self-selecting. Who could pay to go to such a thing? There was that. So it's worth mentioning. But he goes on saying, being anti-Iraq war was coded left, of course. But otherwise, we went through, not so much. And then he goes on to say, I don't know if this thought was supposed to follow immediately on that one. We went through this basic cycle. Centrists running to the press, telling them how ridiculous the whole online thing was. And then, of course, how war hero Kerry was the only option. You know how that one worked out. And he does point out, I'm leftier than I used to be, but then as now, the call was mostly to stand up against the excesses of the Bush, now Trump administration, not institute full communism. Never was. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's a lot of other online discussion of the Slotkin stuff and Jamel Bouie's response to it. It's very interesting to see, and I think we can get along with all of it at some level, and I think that's really the takeaway with it is, there's really no reason not to find, believe it or not, intersectionality with Alyssa Slotkin, even if she insists that, what you'd be finding intersectionality with is someone who hates the word intersectionality. That's okay. Do your thing, win your seat, vote with Democrats. Don't want to say you're a Democrat all that often. I don't care. Vote with Democrats all the time. Sure, we'll take it. If you start departing from that, we got a real problem. If you start thinking that the way to win in Michigan is the way to win everywhere, you're just going to run into reality at some point and find out that it's not true. And, it's also a good time to remind everybody that sometimes you win and you think you know why because you know what you did, but that might not be why, and you might misunderstand exactly what went on. Or you may have it, your finger on the pulse, but again, California's not Michigan. It's just interesting. All right, so I was reading through Atrios's thread here, which was also, again, very interesting, and the origins from way back, from the beginning of the online political movement. They were very vested in being wrong about who was reading and reacting and accepting and interested in online political discourse, and it was always normies and always middle-aged folks, and they were the ones who wanted something to happen, and they were mostly upset about Democratic passivity. They wanted a party that would stand up and be robust. They saw it's like that online meme taken from the televangelist, now that I think about it, right? I don't remember exactly how the phrasing goes, but it was something like he's praying. He says, "Dear Lord Jesus," as he said, or something. I don't remember how he put it. "I see what you've done for others, and I want that for myself," which is a little unchristian in a weird way, but okay, I'm not going to criticize them for their weird kind of Christianity just now. I'll focus on that later at some other point. But yeah, we recognize that they do these things, even though it seems like coveting thy neighbor's ass, or however you want to translate that. But yeah, it's a sentiment we understand, right? I see what you've done for others, and I want that for me. Well, we've seen what the Republican Party has been able to achieve, counter to all logic, reason, science, truth, constitutionality, political science, whatever. They're able to do this for themselves. And gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have that weird, what looks like a superpower for ourselves? Sure, it would be. But in the meantime, the truth is people just wanted somebody to represent them in the discourse. They enjoy discourse. They wanted some of their representatives to enjoy the same kind of discourse, or at least contribute to the discourse without punching them in the face all the time. There was a little bit more, though, to his thread, and the part that's really stuck with me is yet to come. As he says here, we went through this basic cycle, centrists running to the press telling them how ridiculous the whole online thing was, and then, of course, how war hero Kerry was the only option, and we see how that worked out. I'm leftier than I used to be, as he acknowledges, but then, as now, the call was mostly to stand up against the excesses of the Bush, now Trump administration, not institute full communism, obviously true. Then, this bit, I thought this was interesting. Defending the status quo post-Biden administration is defending Dem accomplishments, right? But not just that. Defending Dem accomplishments that you were supposed to be proud of. Right? The things that you centrists yelled at us online type folks for not being proud of, or not being proud enough of. During the Biden administration, the task was to support those things. And you were angry that people didn't stand up for those things. And now you've lost, and we're like, you should stand up for those things, and you don't want to. That's interesting, right? So when they were in power, they were pretty sure that the key to winning this stuff was getting people to stand up in defense of them. All right. But you didn't get everybody to do that. So I don't know. I guess like post-Biden administration, why? I mean, I guess you could say, well, obviously we lost, so that can't be the strategy. And as opposed to saying, well, it was a good strategy. We weren't able to execute it well because there were people who were angry about something else, whether it be Gaza or failure to go further with the Affordable Care Act or whatever. There were always people dissatisfied with how much progressive policy was being accomplished, no matter how much of it was actually being accomplished by the Biden administration. Well, look, we can acknowledge that. It was by far the most progressive administration in a long, long time. Did it go where some people wanted it to go? No. Did those people who were upset about it really want full communism? No, they never did that either, for the most part. And you were never going to satisfy them with a non-communist, and that was okay. You didn't have to satisfy them. And they were casting their votes in protest for the Working Families Party instead in the middle of the presidential election anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But that is an interesting thing. Defending the status quo post-Biden administration is defending Dem accomplishments that you were supposed to be proud of, the things you yelled at us for not being proud of, and now you won't do it either. I thought that was interesting. Anyway, he goes on to say, if they reject activism within the party, it will spill out elsewhere. And I guess they want to spend the next 2 years denouncing blue sky user F. Trump instead of saying F Trump themselves. And no, he doesn't just say F there, but I'm being old-fashioned here because I'm a normie. How do you like that? But yeah, that's an interesting thing too, right? You know, what our real concern is, there's a guy on Blue Sky who says mean things he says crazy things about Trump. He posts under the handle F Trump. That's terrible. And they would rather spend their time worrying about that than saying, yeah, maybe Trump actually should be effed. He's quite an a-hole. Many of them want to do that, absolutely, in their happy place, commiserating with reporters about those mean online lefties who reporters also hate. Might even be good for some of their own re-election campaigns, but the I'm not like those bad Democrats strategy, not good generally. Right? It is interesting. Well, she disassociates herself from the Democratic Party. She only said she was a Democrat once in the whole speech. And that's not what people in my area want. And that and it's important for you to win in your area. That's true. But there's also vast swaths of the country who are like, you know, it would really be helpful for us to win if you didn't use this national forum to say the thing you should be doing is hiding from being a Democrat. You should be being ashamed of that. That's something to shun, because there are some people in dive bars here who don't like Democrats, and I need to win them. I understand that you do, but I'm not certain why that has to be national policy, and why you would use the national platform like this to push that position. You can't give this speech and survive politically where you come from without doing that, but that is also a signal that you're maybe not the person to deliver this speech. But you can't turn down the opportunity because reasons. Because I insist I'm not one of the people running for president, and maybe you're not. Maybe you're just trying to position yourself for a couple more wins in Michigan, and that's an important mission. But maybe this speech wasn't the platform to do it from. I don't know. But she wasn't going to turn her down. It was offered to her. That was a bad idea. She was going to take it. So what are you going to do? All right. So many of them are happy with this situation, as Atrios surmises. The punchline is they won the 2006 midterms because they did start opposing Bush. But then Rahm Emanuel and the reporters who love him gave himself all the credit for recruiting a bunch of centrist cop troop spooks. But hey, even centrism is fine, just not passivity. An interesting summation of the situation we find ourselves in. I don't know. I thought that was a good point and worth bringing up. And that wasn't the only one. Somebody else wrote an article, and I wish I could remember exactly which one it was. Maybe we'll just hit on it by accident because it'll be up at the top of Pocket here. That I thought, hey, that's a good point, and it's buried in this article, and we should be thinking about it. I don't know. Let's see. There are many. I'm considering jumping in to see which one of these it actually is, but there are so many other things that really need to make it to our consciousness. I'm not certain how long I want to spend figuring out which one it was. Maybe we'll just stumble on it, like I said, at random. Big issue in the news today, and we should probably take a look at the headlines and a couple of paragraphs about the news. New raft of so-called executive orders being proposed today, including one that we can only say purports to close the Department of Education. I'm hesitant even to, put this in the news roundup only because it's like 30 years that the Republicans have been running around saying they should just close that Department of Education, and they never really get around to it. And now they're about to try to catch the car. But plenty of analysis out there, and it's good stuff. Did Just Security do one? I think. I don't know. Anyway, look, can you close the Department of Education by executive order? No, you can't. Is he doing that anyway? No, not really. As I understand it, the executive order says, well, to the extent practicable and permitted by law, we want to wind down the activities. Okay, so it's one of those executive orders. It says nothing, as many of his executive orders do. Well, somebody come up with an idea for a thing. And if it's not legal, let's do the things that are legal. And if it is, on the other hand, let's also do some things that are illegal and see what the courts have to say about it. But Yargle Bargle closing Department of Education. So they were waiting for Linda McMahon to be confirmed to the position of Secretary of Education so that she could start implementing whatever part of it would be upheld by court. Well, first she'll start implementing things that will also be struck down by courts. But she acknowledged in her confirmation hearings, no, you can't close or eliminate the Department of Education without congressional action. That's what congressional actors wanted to hear in order to confirm her. I think that's pretty interesting. And that leads us to another interesting top story of the day, which we can get to in just a second, about Republican senators reportedly having, depending on how you read and interpret this thing, this was also an interesting interpretation game, talked to Elon Musk about this whole dodgy thing. And according to one reading from like The Hill and Politico, pushed him to say, listen, in order to make your thing work here, you really have got to send your cuts and your proposals to Congress for approval. That's the only way they're going to survive the courts and actually get something done on a more permanent basis. Or based on the CNN interpretation and then like Judd Legum's reading of it. And he's right here too. One way of looking at this is, and I don't know what the language that was used in the actual discussion between Republican senators and Musk was, but another way of interpreting it is members of Congress come hat in hand to Elon Musk to beg him to please include Article 1 legislative branch in things. Will you please give us a chance to approve your destruction of the federal government? You know, please let us do our jobs. Please allow us to play the constitutional role we've been assigned. And that, too, incredibly weak and weird. But I'm not certain which of the two is closer to the sentiment that Republicans thought they were expressing to Musk. But it's out there. The Washington Post is reporting on the draft executive order set for Thursday today, calls for the closing of the Education Department. Education Secretary Linda McMahon has said that congressional approval is needed to close the agency. Deep cuts to the workforce are expected in the short term before they can get around to actually closing the place, and it's not expected that they will because, again, I guess we have to acknowledge from time to time that thankfully, though we pushed to get rid of it, the filibuster remains in place, so they're never going to get to 60 votes for Senate approval for the closure of the Department of Education, I guess, although they can then go ahead and eliminate the filibuster and get around it that way, I suppose. But I don't even know if they'd get all 53 of their Senate votes for the total elimination of the Department of Education. But then once they gut it and fire all the people and it can no longer work effectively, then I guess maybe 3 or 4 additional Republicans will be less concerned with getting rid of it. I was more struck really by I was just reminded in the subheader, oh yeah, Linda McMahon. I mean, I guess she's been whitewashed into government official now, but I thought that really summarized everything in the state of America. Yeah, the lady who's from the wrestling, professional wrestling gang, World Wrestling Entertainment. Sure, she should absolutely be put in charge of the Department of Education. What do you know? The professional wrestler clowns want to get rid of education in this country. Oh, well, we should go to their dive bars and, hang out with them to see if we can convince them to stop punching us. Anyway, no, you can't eliminate the department without a congressional vote, but in the meantime, you can wreck it so badly that no one will be too sad if it does eventually close down. I think that might be kind of what they're driving at. But I mentioned that there's different interpretations about what it means that Republicans went to Elon Musk post-speech yesterday. I have, Politico on it, and who else wrote on it? I think I shared a piece from The Hill about it, and then people were like, well, The Hill, is that really a great source of information? No, but they did say, well, they usually have it accurate. They just are sometimes a bit of a, trade rag. Politico suffers from the same problem, but as Politico put it, Senate Republicans tell Musk to send his cuts to Congress. You think I could maybe turn up the Hill piece that I saved the other day, or sent around just the other day, as people were saying, the Republicans are finding in town halls and elsewhere that, actually the dodgy agenda and their methodologies are extraordinarily unpopular, and they're beginning to realize that they should be politically uncomfortable with it. Here we are. As who's saying this here? Angus. Who's Angus? Angus Johnston. Who's Angus Johnston? Let's look and see. CUNY professor and a history professor, a historian. As a matter of fact, historian of and advocate for student organizing. How do you like that? Well, CUNY professor Angus Johnston saying a lot of the stuff Trump and Musk are doing has no constituency, like literally none. Much of what they're doing is unpopular among powerful Republicans. That's relevant. It may not be decisive, but it's relevant. And I was saying, as if perhaps to demonstrate the point, we had this piece from The Hill. The way they put it, GOP senators, GOP senators, tell Musk dodgy actions will require their votes, which, I'm never one for saying that the Republican senators are delivering a particularly strong message about anything here, but I read that to mean them saying, we're going to have to put the brakes on some of this stuff. Or at the very least, if you want this stuff to survive, you're going to need us to be involved. And it's not incorrect to read that as them saying, well, please include us in things. Give us back our seat at the table. And of course, they're supposed to be the table. That's the main objection. It's Article 1 of the Constitution pretty squarely lays it at their feet. What are they even doing talking to this outsider billionaire wackadoodle that has nothing to do with anything, who might be high on ketamine the whole time, claiming to be in control of the very purse strings that everybody was positive until a couple of weeks ago actually resided in Congress. So, I see the point. So, as The Hill puts it, Republican senators told tech billionaire Elon Musk at a closed-door meeting Wednesday that his aggressive moves to shrink the federal government will need a vote on Capitol Hill, sending a clear message that he needs to respect Congress's power of the purse. That's not a, incompatible interpretation of what's going on. Musk met with Republican senators at a luncheon to give them an overview of his dodgy team's work to root out the catchphrase, waste, fraud, and abuse, across an array of federal programs. Senator Rand Paul, who largely supports Musk's mission, told him dodgy's efforts to cut spending and reduce federal workforce reductions. Reduce federal workforce reductions? No. Increase federal workforce reductions, but okay. Won't pass muster with the courts unless Congress codifies them by passing a spending rescission package. To make it real, to make it go beyond the moment of the day, it needs to come back in the form of a rescissions package, Paul said after the meeting, pointing to a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court, which had in fact been rendered before we ended yesterday's show with the observation that it hadn't been rendered. It had, in fact, an hour before been rendered. A 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court on Wednesday morning rejecting the Trump administration's argument that billions of dollars in foreign aid should remain frozen. That's the one that Steve Vladeck was saying we've been 6 days waiting for them to act on this, meaning that it was probably the case that there was some internal dissent and they had to hammer it out. There was 5-4 decision, much closer than we should be comfortable with, but at least a decision in the right direction here, saying, you actually have to, do this stuff by legislative mandate. You can't just simply walk in and say executive orders will be enough. So, that was the way the Hill put it. Politico put it. Senate Republicans tell Musk to send his cuts to Congress. Senate Republicans urge Elon Musk on Wednesday to better coordinate with them, with many suggesting the tech billionaire send Congress a package of proposed spending cuts to enshrine the work of his dodgy initiative. The message was delivered during that closed-door lunch organized by Rick Scott. I'm sure that they get at the same sort of thing. This time they lead with a quote from Lindsey Graham. Instead, we need to capture this in the legislative process to make it real. It's time for the White House to now go on offense. Oh, they've been there. We're losing altitude here. We started off good. We're losing altitude. We need to get back on the game, on offense. Mixing all of his metaphors. Then a reference to Rand Paul saying pretty much the same thing. Now, I pocketed, I'm pretty sure, Judd Legum responding to the CNN formulation, which I think he grabbed a screenshot of the headline and not the body of the piece. But I got to search through all these things. I know this is tedious to look for which one is which. But and I'm stumbling upon a number of other things that are interesting and in need of inclusion. It's taking its sweet time to reload all this stuff. But yeah, Judd was of the opinion that the CNN piece that he had grabbed, I think, sort of very weakly made the point. All right, well, let's see if I can't find this thing. I wish that there was a better way of organizing the blue sky things. No, that ain't it either. All right. Well, I'm pretty sure that basically he was, it was his impression that the CNN piece made it sound like Republicans in Congress were begging to be included in their constitutional role. And I'll just say it didn't strike me that way last night, and I don't know whether it was because the headlines were written differently in the the Hill pieces and Politico pieces that I had read, or whether I just really missed something that Judd had picked up on. All right. I mentioned to you also that the Supreme Court did in fact act yesterday. I can refer you there in this case to the New York Times. Adam Liptak did in fact cover it. Supreme Court rejects Trump's bid to freeze foreign aid. The move came after Chief Justice Roberts temporarily paused a trial judge's order requiring the administration to release more than $1.5 billion in foreign aid. The Supreme Court on Wednesday rejected Trump's emergency request to freeze $2 billion in foreign aid in a closely divided decision, indicating that the justices will subject his efforts to reshape the government to close scrutiny. The court's brief order was unsigned, which is typical when the justices are acting on emergency applications. It said only that the trial judge, who had ordered the government to resume payments, should clarify what obligations the government must fulfill. But the ruling represented one of the court's first moves in response to the flurry of litigation filed in response to Trump's efforts to slash government spending. Not even Trump's efforts, it's Musk's. And take complete control of the executive branch. The vote was 5-4. Chief Justice John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett joining the three liberal members to form a majority. We don't even name them anymore. Although the language of the order was mild, tentative, and not a little confusing, its bottom line was that a bare majority of the court ruled against Trump on one of his signature projects. The president's plans to remake American government, the order indicated, will have to face a court more skeptical than its composition, with 6 Republican appointees might suggest. That, in turn, is likely to give rise to major rulings testing and perhaps recalibrating the separation of powers required by the Constitution. Justice Alito, writing for the 4 dissenting justices, said the majority had gone profoundly astray. Does a single district court judge who likely lacks jurisdiction have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion taxpayer dollars? He asked. The answer to that question should be an emphatic no, but a majority of this court apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned. Well, I don't know why you're stunned, except that, you just wanted to undo that part of the Constitution. Does a single district court judge have jurisdiction for national restraining orders and injunctions against mifepristone? No, not really. But when you like it, you like it. And when you don't, you don't. And, I think we've known that about you for quite a long time. So anyway, there's much more to that story. But of course, our next break is coming up, and there are lots of other things that we yet must round up the best we can in one more segment. And all right, well, there won't be anything else before the break because, of course, the computer is slowing down day after day. But the clicking of the mouse pad or the touchpad is back. That seems to be an off and again, on again problem. But yeah, aging the laptop and probably time to replace it. All right, let's see. Other things that we can look forward to and have to catch up with. More developments on the international front, things happening with Ukraine that you need to be updated on, and we'll have to do a mix of headlines and lightning round next. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I found, finally, that Judd Legum, so I thought I had linked to perhaps one of his online outlets versus the social media presence, but I guess not. But on Blue Sky, he was, as I said, he put it, Republicans in Congress are reportedly asking Musk's permission to hold votes. That was his interpretation of the CNN piece headlined, Republicans push Musk to let Congress vote on dodgy cuts. That is an interesting difference, I think. I don't know. Looking back at the headlines I read, what was it over in the Hill? GOP senators tell Musk dodgy actions will require their votes. Slightly stronger formulation. I don't think that if Judd had read the CNN headline first, and I think that's not incompatible reaction. Had he read CNN first and then read The Hill, I don't know that he would have thought that The Hill's version cured the ill, much less the Politico version. Senate Republicans tell Musk to send his cuts to Congress. But they are a better, stronger formulation than CNN's choice here, push Musk to let Congress vote. Although, again, it still means largely the same thing. But, I don't know, interesting phenomenon, I guess, that these things can be interpreted or written up in different ways and produce different results. Okay, but you knew that could be the case. All right. Definitely a few other things we want to include here. So, out there and floating around are bits and pieces of news like that apparently Trump considering deporting or ending temporary protected status for Ukrainians who, fleeing the war, found themselves in the United States and are given temporary legal status here. And in his zeal to rid America of all foreigners, and in particular also to make trouble for Ukraine and mollify Vladimir Putin and the Russians, would like to move to start kicking the Ukrainians out of the country and removing their temporary protected status. That should shock most people, including Republicans. But we'll see whether they stand up to that at all. But likewise, so that reported by Reuters here. Trump to revoke legal status for 240,000 Ukrainians as U.S. steps up deportations. I can just give you the bullet point summaries, and that we can leave it at that for the moment. Trump administration moves. The move is part of a broader rollback of Biden-era migration programs. Some of those migrants could be subject to fast-track deportation. Ukrainian and Afghan migrants face uncertainty under new policies. Okay. Just so we learned a little something about Afghans being included in that as well. So also out on the Ukraine front, this is interesting for longtime listeners of the show. It's been a long time since we talked about these people in particular, and we never really did unravel the weirdness surrounding some of them, and now might be a good time to do so, but perhaps I want to do that offline and see if I can get a handle on it. But maybe it's impenetrable because it's foreign internal politics, and I'm just not sure I'm going to be able to figure it out the same way a Ukrainian would. If Ukrainians are able to figure it out. Here's the story from the Kyiv Independent. Don't know if I've ever called on their services before or not, but not a huge source of news for us. Trump's team leads private talks with Zelensky's political rivals, Politico reports. And so I guess we could, do they link to the Politico story on it? They do. So we could read their version of it. Top Trump allies hold secret talks with Zelensky's Ukrainian opponents. Their subheader, Politico's, as Washington ramps up its pressure on Zelensky to step aside, his rivals are talking to Trump's team. I'm trying to decide whether we do better by reading the Kyiv Independent on this. It's a very short article, or read the Politico version of it. Well, there, I don't know. There's an argument to go either way here. We'll stick with we'll vary our sources a little bit. But the names I was interested in seeing pop up again here, that's one aspect of this article. And then, of course, the other of there being secret negotiations, which I guess we're reading about, which means that they aren't very secret. But in what context? The visit to the White House, the attempt to paint him as a dictator or as somehow illegitimate because he hasn't held an election in the middle of a full-on war with Russia, even though apparently the Ukrainian governing documents, the Ukrainian constitution forbids somehow the elections during a period of martial law. I mean, they are incompatible, but I didn't know that you would enshrine it in the Constitution. Anyway, whose work are we reading here? Martin Fornisek for the Kyiv Independent writes that 4 senior members of U.S. President Donald Trump's team, whatever that might mean, held secret, apparently not, discussions with political opponents of President Volodymyr Zelensky. Politico reported on March 6th. That's today. So I think maybe March 6th, Kyiv time, but not here. Citing 3 undisclosed Ukrainian lawmakers and a Republican foreign policy expert, if there are such people. Trump's allies reportedly, according to Politico, talked with Yulia Tymoshenko. Do you remember our attempt to try to unravel what the hell is up with Yulia Tymoshenko and who is she and what happened to her and why did it happen? But it seemed like an early version of the Trump Manafort type strategy to like brand their political opponents as criminal and corrupt and dispose of them that way. And it seemed like Yulia Tymoshenko seemed like she had kind of fallen victim to that sort of play that they then figured they could use on Joe/Hunter Biden to just sort of insist that there was evidence floating around in Ukraine for some reason of their corruption. and that the same had applied to Tymoshenko, and that she had been faced trial and basically been shipped off to jail at some point. And I was trying to figure out whether there was any legitimacy to it, and B, did it really have a parallel in what they were attempting to do with Biden? They were never going to ship Biden to Ukraine to face criminal charges there. They were going to try and do it here. But also, how true might some of the allegations against Tymoshenko been? It was a very odd thing, and I never did untangle it. And now, though, for Trump, did Trump ever believe those things about Tymoshenko? Did he need to? Is he contradicting previous policy? Would anybody know it? I'm not sure. There's a lot of complication here. Now, there's another name involved, too. Petro Poroshenko, which, again, wasn't he am I mistaking him as with the guy who was, in fact, driven from the country and who fled to Moscow and is now back, by the way, and in the parliament, as I understand it. And golly, there's a lot to catch up on with these folks. So that's who they sat down with. Tymoshenko, former prime minister and head of the opposition. Do you think I can pronounce this at all? Batkivshina. I couldn't possibly pronounce this for you. I'd spell it, but it would be a big waste of time for you. But here's the translation. And this is where we start to think, wait a minute, what? What's the name of their party? The Fatherland Party. That has bad connotations. And then it brings you back to, like, remember when the chief Russian accusation against Ukrainians, and I guess it's still there, right? The chief Putin accusation against Ukraine was that it was Nazified, right? They were going to denazify Ukraine with their invasion, which is an easier sell, I guess, if the prime minister is from the Fatherland Party. I don't know what she's like. I still don't understand her, but I don't know. We'll just put that out there. Who else also spoke with high-ranking members of the European Solidarity Party? Now, European Solidarity, what does that mean? Like they want to join the EU? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe it's all just a lie. Maybe the party name has nothing to do with anything. European Solidarity Party is the party of ex-president Petro Poroshenko, which I thought, but wasn't he sort of pro-Russia in his bent? Why would you call it the European Solidarity Party? What if the part of Europe that you were in solidarity with is Russia? Well, the fringes of Europe solidarity. The news comes after Trump lambasted Zelensky as a, quote, dictator without elections and publicly berated him in the Oval Office on February 28th, underscoring the growing pressure against the Ukrainian president from Washington. From Moscow, really. Trump's push for a quick settlement of the Russia-Ukraine war saw him adopt Moscow-aligned positions while pressuring Kyiv by cutting off crucial military aid and intelligence sharing. That, too, a development of the last day or so. In recent weeks, the White House has echoed the Kremlin's false narrative about Zelensky's illegitimacy, referring to the fact that Ukraine did not hold elections last year. The Ukrainian constitution, of course, does not permit elections under martial law, and critics pointed out difficulties in organizing elections during an all-out war, such as the possibility of voting for frontline soldiers and refugees. Trump also falsely claimed last month that Zelensky's approval rating had dropped to 4%. While Zelensky's popularity was steadily declining through 2024, the White House fallout and mounting pressure from Washington seemed to have boosted his support. According to a survey by the British pollster Survation, carried out between February 25th and 27th, Zelensky leads in the polls. So how do you do that with 4%? Well, what if your lead in the polls was actually, or your take in the polls, was 44%? Well, 11 times what Trump claimed. So why would he why bother with the truth on that one? 44%. He's followed by former commander-in-chief and ambassador to the UK, Valery Zalunyi, maybe Zaluhnyi, Zalunyi, who, by the way, has not publicly confirmed any presidential ambitions. but who is nonetheless polling at 21%. Poroshenko is in there, came in third with 10%, while Tymoshenko scored only 6%, signaling slim chances of beating Zelensky in the election. So, again, there's the dumb Trump claim. He's at 4% in the polls. Who are you having secret talks with? The person who's at 6%. Well, at least 6% is higher than 4%, right? Well, okay, actually 44%, not 4%. Completely wrong. After the televised quarrel last week between Zelensky, Trump, and J.D. Vance, several top U.S. officials publicly suggested that Ukraine's president should step down if he's, quote, not ready for peace. While Tymoshenko and Poroshenko publicly spoke out against holding elections under martial law, Politico reported that they are positioning themselves as more flexible partners for the U.S. than Zelensky, and that could certainly be true. When approached by the outlet, their parties did not confirm talks with the U.S. So that's a pretty quick summary, probably faster than reading the Politico article. It might be a little bit more revealing to read that Politico article, but you should know that that's out there and going on. And let's see what else can we squeeze in here. I feel like there was a couple other things that followed up on that would be helpful, but I really kind of want to skip around and get a couple other things on the record here. And man, I'm not certain which it's going to be, but let's do this one. Yes. Not yesterday so much, but a couple of days, over the past couple of days, I wanted to comment on somebody made this. I thought, this was it. This was the person who made a good point along the way to another good point. However, we're having trouble finding the site, apparently. Why is that the case? All right. Well, it was Liz Dye writing for Public Notice, which, as I recall, is that Aaron Rupar's Substack type thing. Anyway, it was about Pam Bondi and the big, nothing burger, as it says right here in the headline here, but the big bust of distributing. We're going to free the Epstein files, and remember everything that came. They had binders and everything. We're going to have all this information, blockbuster information. We're going to release all the info there is about Epstein, and then you're going to know the truth. And everybody who was actually interested in it, even if they were interested from a crackpot standpoint, found out, there's nothing in here but all the information that was already public to enthusiasts anyway already. And she found herself embarrassed about that. And this is about, to some extent, how she tried to cover up the flop, but then makes a very interesting point about why it was a flop and will remain a flop. The whole inquiry into Epstein and who he did who he did what with, I guess we should say, and both the celebrities on his list and the victims of his crimes. But she ends up making the very good point about the desire to turn this into who let Epstein go, who gave him a free ride. Now, I mean, as it turns out, lots of Trump world figures gave him a free ride. But in an attempt to pin that on someone else, in Democrats, because every Republican accusation is a confession, you hit upon the larger truth that Liz expresses very clearly here. And I'll give it to you the way she writes it. A.G. Bondi blames deep state for nothing burger Epstein files. Conspiracies are fun, reality not so much. What is she getting at here? Last week, President Trump invited a gaggle of right-wing influencers to the White House, which is always problematic. On the driveway outside, right, the toxic super spreaders proudly brandished their, quote, binders of, quote, evidence about the conspiracy to protect pedophile Jeffrey Epstein for the waiting cameras. And there's some, TikTok-style video included. I don't know who these weirdos are, but they're all happily waving around the binders. We finally have the evidence. Attorney General Pam Bondi congratulated herself for, quote, following through on President Trump's commitment to transparency and lifting the veil on the disgusting actions of Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators. But in reality, the folders were stuffed with documents that had long been in the public domain, and the influencers themselves were just props arranged for a photo shoot. That's kind of interesting. Wingnut agitators who'd been excluded from the event jeered, and it wasn't just because they were excluded. They actually had a point. And believe it or not, one of the people who have a point is Laura Loomer, which we should never have to confess to. But there is one person who takes the blame for what happened today. It's Pam Bondi, tweeted Laura Loomer. I think she should resign. Sure, why not? She went on Fox News and said the files were on her desk. Then she went on Fox News last night and said we would have the files today. She's a total liar. Okay, I mean, that's all true. Sort of a stopped clock moment, I guess, for Laura Loomer. She should chain herself to that clock. This is not what we or the American people asked for. That's in all caps. And a complete disappointment. Get us the information we asked for. Groused who? Not Laura Loomer, but fellow lunatic Representative Anna Paulina Luna, before she went off to One America News to vent her ire to the former colleague Matt Gaetz. Irony is, in fact, dead, she notes in the parentheses there. Realizing too late that she'd stepped in it, Bondi fired off an email and posted it online to newly confirmed FBI Director Kash Patel. She's going to order him around. Ready? By 8 a.m. tomorrow, February 28th, the FBI will deliver the full and complete Epstein files to my office. The ones you gave me before is the full and complete ones. They're not full and complete. I want the full and complete ones. Well, you're not getting them. But here's the email. Deliver the full and complete Epstein files to my office, including all records, documents, audio and video recordings, and materials related to Jeffrey Epstein and his clients, regardless of how such information was obtained, she fumed. There will be no withholdings or limitations to my or your access. The Department of Justice will ensure that any public disclosure of these files will be done in a manner to protect the privacy of victims and in accordance with law, as I have done my entire career as a prosecutor. Well, as you'll see, the problem with that is, I have a clip for that.
That is not how this works!
That's the problem. The issue, we're going to release the information in a manner that protects the privacy of the victims. Well, yeah, that's why none of the stuff that you thought you wanted to release is releasable. That's why it wasn't in the binder. It just doesn't work that way. You're doing more why don't you just-ism, and it's incompatible with reality, which point we'll get to, and Liz will make another one along the way. So that's what she wrote in the letter, but that doesn't matter. She went then back to Fox for more cleanup. A source has told me where the documents were being kept. Southern District of New York. Shock. Oh, it's all a conspiracy against you, Pam. That's what Bondi vamped to Sean Hannity. So we got them all by, hopefully all of them, Friday at 8 a.m. because I wrote an email that said I demand them, so they'll definitely show up, right? The AG claimed to be going through a truckload of evidence withheld by her own staff at the Manhattan prosecutor's office. You know, sadly, these people don't believe in transparency, but I think more, unfortunately, I think a lot of them don't believe in honesty, she huffed, the video of which is included below. It's a breathtakingly hypocritical smear by the former state prosecutor who killed an investigation into Trump's scam university, quote-unquote university, after a well-timed political donation. But Bondi's entire shtick consists of railing about the evil deep state, especially in godless New York. 2 weeks ago at CPAC, Bondi defended the corrupt dismissal of charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams by falsely accusing federal prosecutors of taking, quote, one of the biggest mayors in the country off the playing field in order to protect their sanctuary city with, quote, incredibly weak case filed to make deportation harder. Miami Herald journalist Julie Brown, who spent years chasing down the Epstein story and interviewing victims, writes that the FBI's, quote, Epstein files likely contain a tremendous amount of information that can't be released publicly. The identities of minor victims, grand jury materials, both protected by law. Well, we want it all, but we're going to release it in a way that's, compatible with DOJ guidelines and respect for the law. That means you're going to get what's in that binder and almost nothing else. But I want the other thing. I am saying it very loudly and then not doing it. That's essentially what we're looking at here. Epstein's co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, who has appealed her conviction, and any future trial in this appeal could be jeopardized by something like, say, the haphazard release of evidence in her case. Note that this is the same justification, by the way, that Judge Aileen Cannon used when she ordered the DOJ not to release the special counsel report. Oh, there could be a future trial. So, well, there won't be, but there could be. So you're not allowed to release that information. You could put it in jeopardy. Same concept operative here for Ghislaine Maxwell and several others. Plus, of course, all the privacy concerns and grand jury concerns. And Loomer is actually right that if the rumored blackmail sex tapes do exist, those materials would amount to child sex abuse material. Will we have the Department of Justice releasing that to the public? I don't think so. The problem for Bondi is that she swims in a sea of fake online scandals. Oh my God, look who's living in the online world and not in reality. Not like us normie Dems. All right, well, anyway, she swims in a sea of fake online scandals where the truth is largely irrelevant. Elon Musk rants about $50 million worth of condoms for Gaza. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin accuses his predecessor of, quote unquote, stealing $20 billion in gold bars and giving them to Stacey Abrams. Okay, I think we have a sound effect for that one as well. HHS Secretary Kristi Noem steals $81 million from New York based on a lie about gang leaders being housed in luxury hotels. Bondi probably hoped to stage a similar headline-grabbing stunt as her fellow cabinet members and the de facto head of government, Elon Musk. But unlike her colleagues who concoct stories about faceless liberal bureaucrats, Bondi's lie evokes rancid conspiracies about Democratic pedophile cults that motivate a sizable, if deranged, portion of the Republican base. Don't want to appeal to the base, right? That's a formula for disaster. The only thing that'll happen there is you'll be handed complete control of all three branches of government. Anyway, she promises to deliver the goods to people primed by Pizzagate and QAnon to believe wild tales about cabals of evil liberals supposedly raping and murdering children. But there are no goods to be had, not in the FBI vault or anywhere else. Conspiracy theorists babble about a vast plot to protect a demonic predator because that's easier than reckoning with the reality, and this is a great point, the reality that preying on children, especially young girls, was so common 20 years ago as to be barely worth mentioning. It's not that there's a deep state conspiracy to cover it up and let the people off the hook. It's that at the time, people didn't even consider it a crime. That's the true crime of it. It wasn't considered a criminal or even bad or weird thing to do. That's how people got off the hook for it. That's the reality. There was no conspiracy. They just did this stuff. All of them. Every one of them. All the time. How do we know? When you're a star, they let you do it. Yes, and even going back further than that. Some examples. In 1979, the most famous comic filmmaker of his generation, guess who it is, cast himself as a 42-year-old dating a high school girl. He later, in real life, ran off with his 21-year-old stepdaughter. The comedian who defined the 1990s was dating a teenager at the height of his popularity. 2 generations of Hollywood actors happily appeared in movies directed by a genius who pled down from charges of drugging and raping a 13-year-old girl to unlawful sex with a minor. I mean, that's not good, but it's a pled down. To the extent that any of this has changed, it's thanks to the Me Too movement that Trump and his fellow Republicans despise. None of this is a defense of Epstein, who clearly was a monster, but pretending that only a grand conspiracy of blackmail and sex tapes can explain how he evaded prosecution and continued to run in elite circles is willfully to ignore the routine victimization of women and girls. Everyone knew that the finance guru paid young girls for sex, and they all treated it not as a crime, but as the peccadillo of an untutored genius with exotic tastes and the ability to pay for them. It wasn't a secret because it wasn't a scandal. Trump himself joked to reporters, "Epstein's a terrific guy who likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side," as he helpfully put it. And so it's wholly unsurprising that in 2007, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Alexander Acosta, would allow Epstein to plead to prostitution charges and serve a few months in an unlocked jail cell with liberal work release. Like everyone else, Acosta thought the girls were prostitutes, despite their being too young to legally consent to sex with an adult who got what they bargained for. It never occurred to him that this decision would later derail his career and force him to resign his position as Trump's Secretary of Labor. I'm sure he didn't imagine that happening. Nor did it occur to Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi to prosecute Epstein between 2011 and 2018 when she was the chief law enforcement official in the state. As Donald Trump once put it, when you're a star, they let you do it. But now Bondi's between a rock and a hard place. She fed the jackals who bray that the Epstein client list will bring down the pedo cabal covered up by the evil deep state. She can't go back to them now and admit that the episode is just a part of a sad era in which girls were treated like expendable commodities to be rented by the hour. Particularly when her boss has promised to return to that past, restoring America to a halcyon time before Marxist liberals supposedly ruined it with DEI. Because if Epstein wasn't the blackmailing mastermind, he was just another rich guy exploiting girls for sex, just like his real estate buddy who bragged about barging into locker rooms at teenage beauty pageants.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, if those two things are the same, making America great again is going to be even worse for women than we all expected, and Bondi is going to have to do more than snort on Fox about the evil deep state if she wants to distract the masses. Meanwhile, Trump has managed to get actual sex traffickers like Andrew Tate released from Romania and brought back to the United States. We're signing off, handing things over to Justice now. See you tomorrow.